So we don't have to worry about our hair or how we're dressed. So it's very important to me.
Welcome to today's episode of the Comical Heathen. This is your host, Jerry. How are you doing? Thanks for joining us. I'm Dr. Jerry Jaffe. I'm the host of the Comical Heathen. I want to welcome you to today's episode, which features my interview with author A.J. Jacobs. He's author of the New York Times bestseller Year of Living Biblically, as well as many other books. And I had a great opportunity to talk to him a couple weeks ago, and it's our featured interview for today's episode. Before I get to that, I want to cover a few things. First of all, your humble host, that's me, that's Jerry, fighting a little bit of a cold today. I hope my voice can take it. Really wanted to get this done. I think I can make it. I know I can make it. You and me together, we can make it. I want to point out this is our 15th episode, and I'm pretty excited about that. We've been working on this for about a year and a half, and being the 15th episode, I thought I'd take a minute and just, remind people what is going on with this podcast. For about past couple of years, I've been working on a book on religious satire. The actual theme of the book is religious satire post-September 11th, and looking at how some comedians may or may not have reacted to that post-September 11th world. Is there some influence between overlap, a Venn diagram, if you will, of comedy, September 11th, and the social zeitgeist known as New Atheism? So that's kind of the realm I'm exploring, and I actually do stand-up comedy. I make no claims to be particularly good at it, but I do travel around doing shows, and because of that, I know a lot of other comedians. So I actually just started asking some of my, coworkers, hey, what do you think about this idea, comedy after September 11th? And while I was doing that, I had some really fascinating conversations, and it occurred to me, hey, Jerry, you should start recording these and sharing them with people. So that's how this podcast was born. So every episode features an interview with either a comedian or some other really interesting person. And there's no one more interesting than A.J. Jacobs. So these podcasts stand on those interviews, but they also are part of my research because I'm interviewing people to help me write this book. That's where this podcast comes from, and that's what it's about. I've had some very interesting guests. I've had a lot of comedians. I've had Dan O'Shannon, who's one of the executive producers and writers for Frasier and many other TV shows. I've had comedian Sean Lynch, who was on The Walking Dead and Grand Theft Auto and Celebrity Deathmatch. A lot of interesting people. Steve Hofstetter and Mark Jaffe, who, although he has the same last name, is not related to me, but is known for being a writer on Seinfeld, and so on. When I started this podcast about 18 months ago, my goal was to get to 25. I felt like if I could get to 25, that would be a substantial number of interviews. And this is episode number 15, so I guess I am making some progress. Since I'm going through this recap, I'm going to do something a little different. At the end, I always thank people who help me. I'm going to thank some people who help me right now. First of all, that beautiful Bach music played on the organ that you hear during this show was played by my friend Mark Bell. He's a world-famous organist, travels the world playing organs in all the biggest churches, and I was real lucky that he shared some of his music with me. So thank you, Mark Bell. And I have a very good supporter, a friend. He's an audio engineer. He helps me with technical advice. He does write some material, helps me write these episodes. I want to make the standard disclaimer that this show couldn't work without my friend, Jeff Geddert. Thank you, Jeff Geddert. And of course, any mistakes, technical or bad jokes, rest on my shoulders. And anything that has worked out well is due to my gratitude to Jeff Geddert. And I would like to also mention one more thank you. This show does have mascots. They are Calvin and Newton. Who are Calvin and Newton? They are our rabbits. My wife and I keep some Holland Lop, Calvin and Newton. They're little cute fuzzballs. They have little floppy ears. And they've actually been a part of this show from the beginning. They're cute. They inspire me. And they play a very important role in the show because I have noticed, since being a rabbit owner, that my wife and I sometimes use newspapers to line their rabbit cages. And that's really the last use of newspapers, right? Everybody gets their news online. So we get newspapers, we get like old newspapers, we collect them, and we put them in the rabbit cages. I can't think of any other use for a newspaper right now. If you can think of one, let me know. But in the meantime, ironically, keeping old-fashioned paper newspapers in our rabbit cages has led to me reading headlines again. That used to be the old-fashioned way. Young people, old people used to actually get physical paper newspapers and scan the headlines. And then if the headline was interesting, you'd read the rest of the story. I guess it was like the 18th century version of clickbait. And so I've been reading headlines, and sometimes there are certain headlines which catch my attention. They usually have to do with religion or science or something like that that's in the news. And a headline will catch my eye, and that'll cause me to read the article. And then, bam, I'm reading newspapers again. And sometimes I find articles that inspire me. And I'm going to tell you about an article that inspired me for this episode. But before I do, there's something, if you know me, I've never told you this before. I sometimes get vibrations from the other side that give me visions sometimes. And in fact, I'm getting one right now. Sounds kind of like a theremin. Can you hear it? All right, it's coming through now. I see a T. A T. Is it a Tommy? Or a Tonka truck? No, it's Toledo, Ohio. I'm seeing someone in Toledo. His name. Is it a K? K? KKK? No, that's not right. It's not a K, it's a C. Could be Carl. Could be crematorium. Could be Chris. Chris, that's it. I see a fellow. He has a beard, and his name is Chris Tiefel. And he's in a cheap, greasy diner somewhere in Toledo right now, stuffing a big double cheeseburger right in his mouth. Bacon. No lettuce, no tomatoes, nothing that could be considered even remotely healthy. Wait, Chris. Turn around very, very slowly behind you right now. It's John Lithgow. If there's someone named Chris in Toledo listening to this while he eats a burger, he is freaking out right now. What are the odds of John Lithgow standing behind him right now? That would be brilliant. In fact, if any of John Lithgow's people are listening, call me. Let's make this happen. The thing that reminded me about my special powers is that I found in the Rabbit Hutch today several articles about psychics. Anybody who listens to this podcast who has a skeptical mind and critical thinking skills already probably knows what cold readings are. I was just mimicking one. Cold reading is where a so-called psychic tosses out super vague hints, suggestions, and then the audience gives the answers. Like, I'm seeing a name. It begins with the letter J. Could be, and then you look around the audience until someone reacts. The letter J mean anything. The letter James or John, Jennifer, Jessica, Jason, Jeffrey, Justin, Janet, a Jack, a Julie, a Jerry, a Joyce, Jeremy, a Judith, a Jean, a Jandis, a Jordan, Jane, a Jose, Jesus, Jesus, anything. J? Oh, no hits with a J. Maybe, I know what it is. It's changing shape. I couldn't see it clearly. It wasn't a J. It was actually an S. Yes, it had like two hooks, not just the one. Two. It could be an S. Susan, Stephen, Sarah Silverman. It might not be the first letter. It could be a possessive S at the end of your name. Does that mean anything to anyone? Michael's, Linda's, David's. I'm just realized that doing a psychic reading on a podcast is a lot harder than I thought. Hey, but Edgar Bergen made a whole career as a radio ventriloquist, so why not? And of course, the spirits of dead people are all right here beside me. Badly dressed, and they could tell me anything they want at any time. But for some reason, when there's not an audience, they never tell me what they want to say. Seems like they need some random people around me saying if I'm getting warmer or colder, or if they know what the letter J or S or M means. And hey, there's this dead guy right next to me now is going, that's weird, huh? And yet, TV shows like Ellen, Oprah, Montel, Dr. Phil, Dr. Oz still put these frauds on the air. Larry King used to. And people watch this shit. And I don't exactly blame the viewers. Because, you're at home watching TV. If you like Ellen, and the Ellen show starts, and then Ellen has a guest who does anything, you're going to watch it. It could be a guest about the most exciting shades of paint to watch dry, and Ellen fans are going to watch. So when she gives these so-called psychics time on her TV show, viewers are just going to go with it. Hey, it's okay. They don't know the real reason that psychic is on is because R. Kelly canceled at the last minute. but I feel like the showrunners could at least make it more interesting. Why not, if you're going to have a psychic on, why not make an audience full of skeptics or an audience full of magicians? Or what would be fantastic? Have an audience entirely made up of people of Asian descent. No explanation, no advance warning given to the psychic, just an audience full of Asians, Asian Americans. Watch her freak out when she walks on stage. Psychic would be like, I'm getting something here. It's a name that begins with like a squiggly shape with like 3 lines and a part that goes like this. And, it's like squiggle, squiggle, squiggle. Like I saw one on a Chinese menu once. You know what I mean? Does that mean anything to anyone? It would be fantastic. Psychics remind me of superheroes. They sometimes have great costumes combined with imaginary powers. I actually have more faith in Groundhog Day because at least Puxatawny Phil actually sees his shadow. This article claims that there are 95,000 professional psychics in America, which is a surprisingly large number. It would be like someone saying that there are 95,000 spiders living in your basement. I mean, there's some, but it's been a while since you checked, and now you're a little creeped out. The same article says that psychics in America are a $2 billion industry. That's a B, billion. $2 billion industry. $2 billion, I could almost pay off my student loans. Right in Cleveland where I live, there are about 95,000 open mics, but there ain't no comedians making no $2 billion in Cleveland. You know what this statistic reminds me of? That time when Marco Rubio said we need less philosophers and more welders. Turns out he was wrong twice. There's only about 10,000 philosophy professors. He should be encouraging people to take up psychicking. I mean, he is a senator from Florida, which makes sense, since Florida is known for psychics, alligators, and alligators who are psychics. Just think, with nothing more than a bandana, some chakras, and the moral compass of a Trump, you too could cash in on the scam. And hey, chakra's a fun word, right? Sounds like something a foodie would put in a muffin. I love my kale and quinoa muffins with a layer of chakra. What kind of resume does a psychic have? Who else but a psychic would have Thomas Jefferson as a reference? And psychics remind me of coffee. Too much gives me diarrhea, and you got to add a lot of sugar, and I mean a lot just to swallow it. And the ironic thing to me is, if a dead person could really communicate with the psychic, they'd be the ones asking questions. They'd be like, who the hell are you? Why are you charging my grieving loved ones money? And how much are you charging them? Did you use the money I left them to buy that ugly shirt you're wearing? Screw this, I don't need you, I'm going to go talk to them myself. And all that letter guessing and stuff, that's a cold reading. There's also hot readings. That is when the psychic actually knows something about you. And people don't realize how easy it is to know stuff about you. I mean, psychics are even worse than Russians at trolling your social media. You could literally be sitting in an audience, and a psychic or medium could have someone backstage on Facebook with a shortwave radio just giving information about you. Relationship status, single again. Pet dog Fido, recently passed. Foodie who loves muffins with quinoa, kale, and chakras. I mean, they have your whole history right there to look at. That's a hot reading. This one article I have says that sometimes psychics and mediums are called grief vampires, but that sounds too much like a Hot Topic employee. That's too cool. I think a better name would be sick fuck con men who cash in on other people's sadness and loss. If psychics actually had even the slightest bit of genuine ability, they would spend their every waking moment answering the same question over and over and over. Where did Grandpa hide the money? Now, the so-called art, psychics, mediums, faith healers, chiropractors are all protected by the First Amendment. That is, as long as it's just for fun. But if they start scamming people out of big bucks, charging thousands to dispel evil spirits or curses, then it becomes an actual case of fraud, and psychics can and do get arrested sometimes. I mean, I've seen psychics who make spurious claims about speaking with the dead, treating depression, and providing marriage counseling. No need for training, qualifications, or science. These psychics have all they need, a gift. I've seen a lot of articles in the past couple of years about mediums and psychics getting busted. They've usually, at that point, been debunking somebody out of hundreds of thousands of dollars. Sometimes they make plea deals, and whenever you make a plea deal, you have to do an elocution, where you explain your crimes, and every single one of them explains that they're just doing cold reading and hot reading, manipulating the people, which I love. It does give us like some hope about fighting back against these fraudsters. Because remember, psychics are like turtles. Their shell is like the First Amendment that protects them, but you can still make some turtle soup out of them if you're persistent. And that is what I found at the bottom of the rabbit hutch today. I consider misinformation a sin, and that's why we have to fight back with critical thinking skills and skepticism. And hey, I'm not trying to ruin anybody's good time, but it might be your dogma, but it's my karma. All right, so now that we got that out of the way, I'd like to get to my interview with A.J. Jacobs. I had a great talk with him. We talked by Skype. The conversation is a little Skypey, but my computer has pretty high quality, so this is very listenable, very nice conversation. We talk about his life, his work. AJ talked about his approach to humor writing and memoirs. It's kind of an extreme memoirist where he gives himself challenges and then sort of chronicles how they affect his life. We talk about some of the other challenges he did. But his book, The Year of Living Biblically, was on the New York bestseller list for many, many weeks, and was eventually turned into a sitcom of the same name. It only lasted one season, and we talk about that a little bit too. And a couple other things that come up is I've asked every comedian and other guest on this show if they think 9/11 had any effect on their work or on humor in general. And AJ is one of the first people to actually just say yes to that question. So thank goodness for that. It gives me some quotes I can use in my book, ha ha ha. And also we'll hear what he thinks about that. And I do want to just tease a little thing. You've all heard of the golden rule. AJ is going to tell you what the platinum rule is. With no further delay, let's get to my interview with A.J. Jacobs.
All right, well, this is Dr. Jerry Jaffe, your host here at the Comical Heathen, and I am so pleased to have as my interview guest today, author and journalist and humorist, A.J. Jacobs.
So, thank you, Jerry. It's great to be here.
Thank you, AJ. We've never met, but I've read a number of your books, and including Year of Living Biblically, so I'd love to talk about your work. And that book. I know a lot about you as a fan, but for listeners who are just meeting you for the first time, what should they know about you? What's your background? How'd you get into writing?
Sure. I got into writing because I had no other skills, so that's the main thing. And my writing genre is I try something out for a few weeks, a month, a year, and then I write about the experience. So you mentioned my book, The Year of Living Biblically, and that was where I tried to follow all the rules of the Bible as literally as possible. So everything from the Ten Commandments to not shaving my beard and stoning adulterers. I used very small stones like pebbles. So, I did another one where I tried to be the healthiest person alive and changed everything in my diet and exercise and how I went to the bathroom.
Sure.
I won't get into that unless you want me to. I'm happy to. So that's sort of my genre. They call it immersion journalism or stunt journalism or experiential journalism, whatever they call it, I'm okay with.
Now, your first book of that kind, at least the one that I read, was the Know-It-All. You endeavored to read a whole encyclopedia set A to Z within one calendar year?
Exactly. Well, I missed my deadline. I went over the calendar year, but I was able to read the whole Encyclopedia Britannica from A to Z, which is 33,000 pages. And it was, my intellectual Mount Everest.
I enjoyed that memoir. It's the first one of yours I read. For you, entertaining read, but for you doing it, was it worth it?
Well, it's interesting. I have forgotten, I'd say, about 99.4%, plus or minus. But I will say I do remember more than not 0.6% of the encyclopedia is still, that's a lot of information. So I do feel I know more. And there were some bigger takeaways, which was, for instance, the good old days were not good. Like, you read about history and it sucked. Like, so even though this is in many ways a terrible era in American history, taking the long view, we've got so much going for us. Even just to take one out of like 1,000 examples, a popular medical treatment in the past were tobacco enema. No, it was tobacco enemas. They would literally take a hose and stick it up your butt, and then they would blow smoke up your butt to cure your stomach ache. And it was like the phrase blowing smoke up your ass. There are theories where that came from, but it's probably from this practice, the tobacco enema. So yeah, there are many reasons to be thankful to be alive today.
It's also funny to me that you went to a medical example, because I have a little mantra I live by, which is I would not want to live in any era before penicillin was invented. Like, just being in the post-penicillin era is the preferable half of history I would like to live in.
That is such a good point. And my mantra is surgery before anesthesia.
Oh.
Whenever I'm in a bad mood, that's what I always say to myself. I'm like, listen, because I read some firsthand accounts of what that was like. Not pleasant. Not pleasant.
When you do these like experiential memoirs, which in addition to several books, you've done articles, some of which were collected into a book as well. The Guinea Pig Diaries, I think it was called.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's not a one answer to this, but where do you get your inspiration? Like, you're walking around and then one day you think, hey, I'm going to live according to all the rules of the Bible. Like, how does that stroke of lightning like that come to you for any of these experiments?
That's a good question. I see something that I find interesting and I sort of take it to the extreme. And what would it be like to live it out? So I remember many years ago reading The World is Flat, or The Earth is Flat by Thomas Friedman, and it was all about outsourcing. So I'm like, well, what would it be like if I outsourced everything in my life? So I did. I hired a team of people in Bangalore, India, to answer my emails and my phone calls and to argue with my wife for me. So that's one of the ways I think about it. Is I look at an interesting cultural phenomenon and then say, what would it be like if you sort of take it to the absurd extreme? And hopefully the hope is that you learn something. I don't want to continue this. I don't want to live biblically for the rest of my life, but that you'll get some wisdom out of it that might even improve your life, or that might, as satire, might expose some hypocrisies.
Sure. Well, satire is the theme of this podcast, but I want to ask you at least a couple more questions just about your work before digging into that nugget. Another one of the Guinea Pig Diary sort of mini experiments, and if I have the phrase wrong, please correct me. Did you go for a month or 2 weeks or a month trying to practice radical truth-telling?
Yes. Yeah, more than that, a couple of months doing it. It's called radical honesty.
Okay.
And it was invented by a psychologist in Virginia who believes that you should always tell the truth.
Sure.
But he goes further than that. He says whatever's on your brain should come out of your mouth, like no filter. So I tried that, and it was, it was horrible. It was an absolute disaster because, the idea is you're supposed to say things like, if you are having a fantasy about your wife's sister, you're supposed to tell your wife and her sister.
Right.
So you can imagine this is not great for any part of your life, your marriage, your job, your friendships. I don't recommend it overall. But I will say, again, I did learn some life-altering truths, which is that there are times that it's important and liberating to be more radically honest. But it doesn't have to be like, I'm not going to talk about my fantasies about my wife's sister, partly because she doesn't have a sister.
Sure.
But radical positive honesty, I think, is something that I've tried to adopt.
Okay.
Where I'm like, even if it's awkward, just trying to be like, tell an old mentor how much he meant to me. Just remembering to be really honest about your feelings.
Yeah.
So that radical positive honesty, I think, is something to consider.
Well, your wife, appears in these narratives, so just in general, she must be a good sport about it.
She is, and she is, but she does get back at me. Like in the year of living biblically,
yes,
there was. I was trying to take the Bible as literally as possible. So in Leviticus, it talks about how you cannot touch women during their time a month during their
Right.
menstrual cycle. And if you take Leviticus really seriously, it says that you should not sit in a seat where a menstruating woman has sat.
Right.
And my wife found that offensive, so she sat in every seat in our apartment, and I was forced to stand for the year. So she's able to get back at me for these things.
So, for the Year of Living Biblically, not to overdo it, but I really enjoyed that book. I've read it a couple times. I've given it as gifts numerous times.
Wow, thank you.
One of my friends loves that book so much that I texted him after we communicated and said, I'm going to interview A.J. Jacobs. And he was like as enthusiastic as I am. So that book is really like stuck with me.
I love it. Well, you make me commit the sin of pride.
You're welcome. That's what I'm here to do.
Yeah.
So how did the Year of Living Biblically begin? What was the stroke of lightning that like sent you off on that journey?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, just my background, as I say in the book, I grew up with no religion.
Sure.
I'm Jewish in the same way the Olive Garden is Italian,
Okay.
so not very. But I wanted to learn about religion. I was fascinated that billions of people
Mm-hmm.
are religious, and I just wanted to understand, am I missing something?
Sure.
What is going on? What are the good parts of religion in addition to what are the ridiculous parts?
Sure.
So I thought this was a way to try to dive in, to actually immerse myself and live by the Bible.
Right.
And then the more satirical reason I wanted to do it is just reading, all these millions of people, especially in the United States, who say, oh, I live by the Bible,
Right.
literally. And that's why homosexuality is a sin. It says it right there in the Bible.
Yeah.
Or, that's why the world is 6,000 years old.
Right.
And I'm like, my feeling was, you say you're living by the Bible literally, but what are you? No, because there's,
Yes.
are you separating? Are you avoiding wearing clothes made of two kinds of fabric?
Yes.
No, you're cherry picking
Yes.
the different parts of the Bible that back
Sure.
up your prejudices. So I thought one way to expose this would be to sort of become the ultimate fundamentalist and actually live by all the rules of the Bible.
Right.
So there was one more earnest motivation to try to see what was good in religion that I might be missing and might be able to take. And the other was the more sort of satirical, trying to show the flaws of fundamentalism.
In terms of trying to show the flaws in fundamentalism, I know in more, let's just say like more, like the new atheist movement, your Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris's, they get a lot of like pushback. Now your book isn't sort of like that bulldog-ish, but did you get pushback? Were there angry letters or complaints from people who considered themselves religious?
It was much less controversial than I thought.
Okay.
And partly this is because of the confirmation bias. So I would get a lot of letters from atheists saying, thank you for exposing how crazy ridiculous the Bible is with all these rules about stoning adultery.
Yes.
But I also got lots of letters from religious people saying, thank you for showing the good side of religion and, and renewing my faith.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's not exactly what I was intending, but it's almost like the Bible itself, where you read it. There's a great quote, I forget, some poet said, we read the Bible day and night, some see black and some see white. And it's true. You can take, you can read the Bible as, a progressive document that against oppression, or you can use it to justify slavery, as was done in the 19th century. So it was fascinating to see the reaction, just the confirmation bias
I'd
in
imagine
action.
So. If there's one you can think of, if not, I might edit this question out. Did you get any letters that you responded to, either to defend yourself or because they moved you in some way? Or any responses, emails, letters that you responded to?
I do try to respond whenever I can. And I especially was moved by the letters where it would be like someone who grew up in a very conservative religious family who, said like, I don't believe, or I'm gay and my parents don't accept me.
Right.
And your book showed me that, maybe there's another way and that the Bible, because I interview people who are like,
Right.
gay evangelical Christians, which is I thought an oxymoron. But so I love that. Made me feel very good.
Let me ask you a question about interviewing people, and I'm also going to make like a quick comparison. I'm sure I can't be the first one. It's just a obvious comparison, which is the kind of benchmark film Religulous by Bill Maher, and which is a film, not a book, but he goes to different people and places while investigating. And he's a little bit more in that Richard Dawkins, aggressive camp.
Sure. Yeah.
But it's still kind of similar. Like he goes on a little journey where he meets different religious people and hears what they have to say. So I mentioned that comparison because The Year of Living Biblically has that kind of narrative as well. You go out and meet different people and learn about either their beliefs or their rituals or participate in some little rituals here and there. So just how did that go in general? And then were there any that still stick with you now?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's my favorite part of the project was interviewing people with wildly different belief systems.
Right.
And I did like Religulous, however you pronounce it.
Yes, however he wants to say it.
I tried a slightly different approach, I think. I tried because I did want to, expose the more harmful religious beliefs, but I also wanted to I did try to go in with giving the benefit of the doubt, almost more anthropological. Yes. Why do they believe this? What does it do for them? Yes. So something like when I went to the Creationist Museum, which deserves ridicule, for sure. But at the same time, I wanted to figure out why do they believe this? What does it do for them? Are there any good points to it? Even looking for the good, even in the most absurd. And I was able to find some good points. For instance, they talked about this idea that we all are descended from Adam and Eve just 6,000 years ago. Right. If you have that point of view, then it's very clear how closely we're related. Closely we are cousins. And weirdly, they are not really racist, at least some of them. I can't say that for all. But some of the people who worked there were very much into the idea of, we're all a big family, and they're homophobic, but they're not racist. Right. So the idea of this as a way to think about that we're all so closely aligned and we're all on the same side. We're all God's children. I'm an agnostic atheist, so I don't believe we're God's children. But I think it's a useful way to look at the world and maybe to treat each other with more kindness. So,
which that's a kind of that's a thing. Stephen Colbert, who is Catholic raised and basically a believer, will often say that the point of religion is to make you a better person if you're doing it right. I'm paraphrasing, but if you're doing it right, your religion should make you a better person.
Well, that's what I talk about in the book. I'd say everyone cherry picks from the Bible. So, you can cherry pick the really rotten cherries, which are about intolerance and how homosexuality is evil. But there are some good cherries. There's some good, there's cherries about loving your neighbor and compassion and embracing outcasts, and that's some pretty good. Those are some pretty good cherries. I mean, the golden rule. I prefer the platinum rule. I don't know if you know the platinum rule.
What's the platinum rule?
Because the golden rule is treat others as you would like to be treated yourself. But what if you're a masochist, or what if you have a fetish for balloon popping, and you give your friend 100 balloons, thinking that's what he wants, and maybe he doesn't like balloons. Right. The platinum rule is more treat others as they would like to be treated. It's a little bit better.
I've never heard that before.
But anyway, there are some good cherries in the Bible.
Well, the one, as an academic, I've written a paper about the Creation Museum, and if I was going to... I went down there and I also tried to be journalistic and objective, what is going on here? What can I observe or learn by being here? And if I had to cherry pick something that was in the Creation Museum that I thought could be a positive value, it would be that they consider weeds evil. There's an actual thing where they say weeds are evil. So I think most of us can get on board with...
Weeds in your garden, lawn weeds? I like it.
Yes.
Yeah,
So I guess if you're open-minded, you can find something.
always find something. That's a nice way to, that's nice. I think it's a nice way to approach the other tribe because it's.
Well, I brought up the Bill Maher comparison because I think as like a narrative, there's parallels, but in the satire in your book, in terms of exposing possible hypocrisy or groundwork for doing so, but the writing was still like a genial and a pleasant, and all of your encounters were like documented in a friendly way. I mean, a different sort of mentality.
Well, that's nice to hear. I mean, partly, I think that when you're trying to convince someone to change their opinion, attacking that opinion is not going to work. Like, that is just going to polarize them. So maybe being generous and looking, for the good and as well as critiquing it might work. I don't know if that's true, but it was my approach.
Sure.
And I think, I did get some letters. I did get a lot of letters saying, this is, I disagree with you, but you made me realize that it's,
sure.
I don't have to hate gay people, which was lovely. And I did get a lot of letters saying that they were praying for me.
Sure.
So that's nice. I don't believe that prayer works, but it can't hurt.
Sure.
It can't, maybe in that 0.1% chance that prayer works. This is great.
Sure.
I've got a lot of people praying for me.
It's a win-win.
Yeah.
So another just big offshoot of the Year of Living Biblically is that I got optioned by Brad Pitt's film company and then eventually turned into a sitcom.
Yes.
CBS, if I remember.
Yes, CBS, exactly.
So congratulations on at least having that occur.
Thank you, I suppose, yes.
And then, it's as a process, there's several steps, so I don't know if we have to go too far down the rabbit hole, but what was that like? What was it like getting it optioned? What was it like when it got turned into a TV show? How involved were you?
The whole process was hilarious because it went through so many iterations.
Right.
It's like a parody of Hollywood. People would have their own ideas on what it would be.
Sure.
And the sitcom that came out, I really liked the people doing it.
Sure.
And I think they were super talented.
Yep.
Actual content of the sitcom, not my favorite.
Right.
Not my favorite. I was not unhappy when it was canceled after 13 episodes.
Sure.
Because it was very loosely based on my book.
Right.
So the parts that were the same is the guy was a writer and he was trying to live by all the rules of the Bible, literally.
Right. Yes.
And he lived in New York. But there were many, they took many liberty. First of all, they changed my religion. I'm sort of, as I say, I'm Jewish,
yes.
But this guy became a lapsed Catholic, I suppose, because there are more Catholics or Christians than Jews in America. I also thought, I knew we were kind of in trouble when CBS would not let the main character grow a beard.
Okay.
Because the Bible says, Leviticus, you cannot shave the corners of your beard.
Right. And
I didn't know where the corners were, so I just let the whole thing grow.
Yes.
And by the end, I kind of looked like Ted Kaczynski.
There's some great photos of you.
Well, thank you. Yes. I think that actually helped a lot, seeing the crazy. But CBS, I think, was worried that the character would look too crazy and turn off Middle America and look like a terrorist.
Right.
So they wouldn't let him grow the beard. And I was like, that's not a good sign. They are going to definitely whitewash this idea.
Yes.
And they did, because as I mentioned, the idea was part of the idea was to expose fundamentalism, whereas the TV show seemed to be like, let's show the good parts of religion. Let's show how. Right. So the idea was that this character would become a better person by following all the rules of the Bible.
Right.
So it was almost like they took the idea and went in the opposite direction.
Yes.
So it was. I loved the process, as I say, because I got to go out and hang out on the set and have free craft services. That was awesome.
Yes.
But the result, I was like, oh boy. And just to give you one example,
please.
The main character, it's almost like they took it like the year of living religiously as opposed to the year living biblically, because they are different. So, for instance, in one episode, the joke was he had a little keychain with a statue of Jesus, and it was called, he called it Keezus. That was the joke. It was like some portmanteau. Was funny. But the truth is, if you follow the Bible literally, one of the top commandments, I think it's 2 or 3, depending how you can count, do not make images of anything on earth or in heaven or the sky. Do not make graven images. So a statue of Jesus is like an idol. It's like totally banned. I would never do that during my year. I mean, I took it so far that I wouldn't doodle, I wouldn't draw pictures of people, I wouldn't draw stick figures, I wouldn't do emojis because that's basically portraying a smile. So and that I wanted to show, this, don't take the Bible literally. And theirs was more like, hey, look at this guy, he's becoming religious. Isn't that interesting?
Yes.
So it was a wild experience, and I'm glad that it's over.
I watched the first couple episodes, and without the behind the scenes, but being a fan, I kind of like felt what you're saying. I think the way I would have put it at the time, and maybe even colored by what you're saying now, is that they didn't lean into the concept. Like, they didn't commit to the bit, as we say in comedy. There was like a comedic idea or satiric idea, and they kind of leaned away from it.
Yes, I agree. Yeah. I mean, the thing is, in the Bible, part of the book was about becoming a better person. Like, part of it was like trying not to gossip as much and trying not to covet. And, I still think those can make your life better. Okay. But half the book was about the craziness. Yes. Like the Bible says, if 2 men are in a fight and the wife of one of the men grabs the testicles of the other man, then her hand shall be cut off. Right. So I would spend like pages like trying to figure out what the hell is going on here. And that part just was swept under the rug in the TV show.
Sure. Well, let's talk about satire for at least a few minutes directly.
Sure.
Let's start at square one. Do you consider The Year of Living Biblically, the book, your book, to be a satire?
I think partly. Partly it was earnest, I tried to mix it up so that part is earnest and like actually seeing what is useful in religion, if anything. And I do think there is I do like some of the rituals. I don't believe in God, but I like a good Seder where you get together with the family. But some of it, was satire and trying to parody the or take to the extreme the more ridiculous parts of the Bible. So, I would say it's, partly satire.
So the idea of taking, an idea that you're studying or criticizing to an extreme, that's like a very Greek version of satire. It's like where the word lampooning comes from.
That's interesting. Yeah. And I also think the idea of taking things too literally is sort of a genre of comedy. Yes. So, when they say, like, I didn't do this, but there were people in the Bible, it says, if your eye offends you, then pluck it out. Right. And there are people throughout history who plucked out their eyes. And, they weren't trying to do shtick, but in retrospect, it's darkly amusing. Yes. Like, these crazy people took it literally. So, taking things overly literally, I think, is almost like my kids used to read this book, Amelia Bedelia.
Yeah.
You know that?
Yep.
And that was the idea, they would say to the maid, draw the curtains, and she would literally take out a pen and draw a picture of curtains. Or, dress the turkey, and she would put clothes on the turkey. Sure. So that, I think, is another satirical element.
Oh, it's just, I can't stop myself from saying this, but in the Marx Brothers, that was part of Harpo Marx's shtick. That someone would say something in the room, and then he would do literally. Like there's a scene where they're locked in a room, and Chico hands him a rope and says, "Tie on the bed, rope out the window." And he takes his tie and puts it on the bed and throws the rope out the window.
There you go. Exactly. Very similar.
As a satirist, or even as a humorist in general, are there, who are your forebears? Are there influences, either writers or comedians, that either you admire or you emulate?
That's a good question. Definitely. I mean, I have a lot of people I admire. I guess my books are often a mix of genres.
Sure.
So, partly it's like, the first person, like David Sedaris, who's the master of this. So, just trying to approach something the way he does. Partly it's this genre of like immersing yourself in something.
Right.
So George Plimpton was one of the founders of this, where he was a writer in the 60s and 70s, and he would join a baseball team or a football team, or he would get punched in the face by a professional boxer. So I thought I liked that. And in terms of parody, I mean, I guess my humor was formed from places like Saturday Night Live and Woody Allen and Monty Python. They did a lot of brilliant religious satire. So, I don't know. It's just a mishmash.
Right. Is there anyone currently, comedians or other writers, that you think do satire really well?
Oh, sure. And now it's coming. Now I'm blanking, but...
okay, you're welcome. You're welcome.
I am a huge fan of Stephen Fry.
Sure.
I always think about... I saw a clip of him on this British TV show, and the guy's interview question that he always asks at the end of his interviews is, when you get to the pearly gates, if there is a God, what would you say to him? Yeah. And, apparently most people are like, well, thank you for the life and, the miracle that you created. And Stephen Fry said, and I'm paraphrasing, but he's like, what the hell is wrong with you? Bone cancer in children? Like, what kind of sick sadist would come up with that idea? What? You are a terrible, terrible being. And I always that just makes me laugh because it's so true. Like, what kind of a horrible person would inflict this much suffering on the human race?
Right.
So,
and he has that, I can't remember if it's Oxford or Cambridge, but he's one of them, and he has that like strong classic British accent. And so when he says stuff like that, it both sounds like gentle, but also like authoritative. Like, oh my God, like someone who knows what they're talking about is saying this.
That is so true. Yeah, I think an English accent raises your perceived IQ by like 7 points.
And for him, I'm going to give him 9. Like,
yeah, I mean, I think genuinely he has a huge IQ, so he doesn't even need it. But
no, well, he was on the old British version of Whose Line Is It Anyway? And they were doing a skit, and the suggestion from the audience was do like a Roman drama genre, and he started improvising in Latin. Like,
oh my God, yeah, that guy is fantastic, and he just seems like a nice guy too. Yeah. He just seems like he genuinely, which I like. Like I don't think I find anger can be funny, like the Sam Kinison really angry humor. But I actually prefer when it's a little more gentle and compassionate type satire. Right. But that's just me. That's personally, I don't know which is more effective.
Right.
But for me, I just prefer the Stephen Fry gentleness.
So one of the premises of my book, which is sort of the serious side, the dark cloud to my silver lining, is that after September 11th, with the generic rise of what's now called New Atheism, there was like a parallel component where at least some comedians were becoming more vocally into religious satire. And again, Bill Maher is the most obvious example, but there are many others I could list. But your book comes out after September 11th. I don't know if that was on your mind or not at all. But in general, any effects on either you and your writing or culture and humor after September 11th that you think about or that you would notice now that I've pointed it out? Just thoughts on that theme?
Yeah, I guess I can just speak personally because I haven't studied the societal effects. But I would say, for me, that was one of the reasons I really wanted to attack fundamentalism. Because I do think, of course, that 9/11 was a result of fundamentalist thinking. And some of these radical Islamist followers are actually doing a similar premise to my book, but not as like a book contract, but instead as a earnest way of life. So like beheading adulterers are like they're real stone. They in some countries they still do stone adulterers, not as a joke, not with pebbles.
Yes.
So I wanted that definitely made me nervous about fundamentalism.
Sure.
So it was, Islamic fundamentalism, but also Judeo-Christian fundamentalism, which, the idea that homosexuality is a sin or Harry Potter is evil because it endorses magic. So, but yeah, 9/11 was definitely, a wake-up call, or that fundamentalism is super dangerous.
Sure. I have a couple of sort of questions that'll lead us to our end. So I thank you. And I know I'm sort of trying to manage this, so we're not here all day. Respect your time. So here's just a couple of questions that'll lead us to an end. One is, what are you working on now? Like, what should A.J. Jacobs fans be looking for in the next couple of years?
Well, I just finished a book, so they can look for that. It's called Thanks 1,000, and I went around the world and tried to thank 1,000 people who had even the smallest role in making my morning cup of coffee. So I thanked the barista, went to South America, thanked the farmer, but I also thanked, the logo designer, the biologist who worked on the coffee beans, the trucker, the person who painted the yellow lines in the road so the truck wouldn't veer into traffic. So the idea was, again, one of connection, that we're all connected.
But your previous book, or the one I'm currently reading anyway, It's All Relative, had that kind of theme as well.
Totally, very similar theme, that we're all cousins.
Right. And also, this might not be your intention, I'm just reacting while we're talking, thanking 1,000 people, including the people who paint the roads and whatnot, seem to, to me, this is my gut reaction, could be seen as a response to the idea of entrepreneurs are independent succeeders.
I love that. That was a big part of it, is that this cult of the individual is not good. Like this, Obama got in trouble for giving that speech that said, you did not build this alone, the government built the roads that you use for your business.
Yes.
And he got a lot of crap for that.
Yes.
But I agree with the thesis. It takes thousands of people to make anything work.
Right. And I'm drinking coffee now while we're speaking, so that coffee got to me somehow.
Exactly.
And also, just as a kind of a last open-ended question, is there anything about humor or satire that you think is important that we haven't gotten to yet? Or something you've never been asked that you would like to be asked, and now I'll ask you it?
Well, I guess, I think about humor a lot, and I do think about sort of, angry, mean humor versus kind of more gentle humor. And I guess I've kind of migrated away personally from using mean humor and enjoying it, because it is enjoyable. It really reaches.
John Cleese recently said that he thought one of the funniest things in comedy was an insult.
Yeah,
but even when he said it, he repeated himself. But I mean that in comedy, not in real life. He made a point to say, in real life, we shouldn't just go around insulting each other because it's funny. But in comedy, it's hilarious when characters insult each other.
Yeah. No, it is. It's the basis of most sitcoms is 80% insult humor. Yep. I guess I've moved more towards absurdist humor, and I really almost puzzles and weird recursive humor. So that, I don't know, that's where I am personally. But
sure. We mentioned that, your wife appears in your books as a character and as a factor, and she must be a good sport about it, and she knows what you do as a job. That's a common thing with actors and comedians, our spouses and partners sort of have to accept our weird jobs. I will say it's an amusing, if I dare say, running joke through your books is also your brother-in-law.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. And again, you never insult him. If anything, he's almost like a foil for self-deprecating humor. But you are still sort of poking at him as a regular, character that appears in your books.
Well, I do think that, making fun, if I'm going to insult anyone, I'd rather insult myself.
Right.
Because I think that, it's just less of an asshole move. And B, it's, I do think just, it evokes sympathy and
Yes.
gets some points. So yeah, I am for exposing my flaws. That's actually one of the lessons from radical honesty. Is like, be radically honest about your flaws, your mistakes. And I've tried to do that. Like, even with books, I like to point out, I would never write this today, or, this is, I'm really embarrassed by this passage.
Well, I don't think your books would work really. And again, I can't psychoanalyze you. I'm just responding to the books. If there wasn't a pretty high degree of sincerity, like there's a radical honesty has to be one of the ingredients, because if you're not reflecting on these experiences, then what's the point in having them, writing about them, or reading them?
Yeah. Well, I'm sincerely grateful you say that. 'Cause I do think that. I am weird more and more as I get older and older, like weirdly earnest. Like I still want to express it in a humorous way,
Right.
but I do really want to get to the truth. And I think, being totally as honest as possible is the best way to do it.
Well, the written description of this podcast, I'll have links to your website and to your Amazon page where people can look up your books.
Great.
And I'll put in your Twitter handle, and hopefully people can look you up after this interview. And I just want to thank you for sharing your morning with me and your thoughts about comedy and writing.
Well, thank you, Jerry. I loved it, and I will continue to listen to your podcast because I think you do a great job. And listen, humor and religion are two of the biggest topics around, so I'm glad you're covering them.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. All right.
All right.
So
Have a great day.
Yes. You too, sir.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that. Was it good for you? It was good for me. Hey, I want to thank AJ. Thank you, AJ, for taking the time to talk with me. I really enjoyed our chat. Great guy, super funny, super easy to talk to. Thank you very much. And at the top, I took the time to thank some people, so I'm not going to repeat all my thank yous. You guys know I love you. But I do want to thank you for listening. I appreciate you. Remember to give us a rating on iTunes and Stitcher and leave any comments. You can email us at comicalheathen@gmail.com. The Comical Heathen is also on Facebook. And if you want, you can tweet at me directly, the host, Dr. Jerry Jaffe. My Twitter handle is @JerryClarkJaffe. That's right. My middle name is Clark. What are you going to do about it? Huh? That's what I thought. Hey, anyway, thank you so much for listening. Thank you, AJ. Thanks for listening.